rugged and remote coast of the Outer Hebrides. A coast of islands, skerries and lochans. Nowhere else in the British Isles can match this wonderland of stacks, secret inlets and windswept shell sand beaches. The Vikings called them Harbrudoi, islands on the edge of the sea.
And the edge is exactly what it feels like. Over there to the east are the islands of the Inner Hebrides and of course mainland Scotland itself. But over there to the west there's nothing but 2,000 miles of Atlantic Ocean.
This island hopping journey takes us over 120 islands and thousands of miles of spectacular Hebridean coastline. Bracing themselves for a windswept journey with me are my fellow coasters. Anthropologist Alice Roberts discovers a surprising start to the oil industry.
Fantastic.
Oh, amazing.
Wildlife expert Miranda Kristovnikov swims with puffins and explores a wrecked, whiskey-laden ship that became a legend. While I tee off on the holy grail of golf courses. Hermione Coburn, Earth scientist and newcomer to Coast, gets to grips with the secrets of wind energy.
Welcome to the island coast.
Today we're heading 150 miles northwest of Glasgow to the very edge of the British Isles. From Mingulay, our journey north takes in the magical island of St Kilda and continues all the way to the Butt of Lewis. Our first port of call is the beautiful island of Mingulay in the south.
This is the sort of place that really puts the Isles into British Isles. For sheer dramatic scenery, you cannot beat this stretch of coastline, especially down here around Mingulay. Look at that on a day like today and tell me there's a more impressive sight anywhere.
These rocks have stood here for 3,000 million years. The elements have eroded them to form majestic cliffs and archways.
This is like another world. It's like Skull Island. It's the sort of place you expect to find King Kong living.
It's hard to imagine anyone could live here, but first impressions can be deceptive. On the other side of the steep cliff lies a lush green valley and the remains of a village. With an abundant supply of fish and birds to eat, Mingulay was once home to a thriving community. But after 2,000 years of occupation, the island was abandoned within a single generation. To discover what happened to the lost souls of Mingulay, I'm meeting up with Callum McNeil, whose ancestral family once owned the island.
It's hard to believe that less than 100 years have passed since that was abandoned, because it looks like some ancient settlement from thousands of years ago almost.
Yes, it's difficult to even identify the houses near the shore now because of the encroachment by the sandblow. If you look at the photograph, an old photograph here, that's a typical example of the houses.
So it's like a big, thick double wall.
Yes.
And the roof looks as if it's squatting in the middle of it.
They were quite low walls. I mean, they tended to keep everything close to nature, and they were a big improvement on the houses of maybe 100 years prior to that, when there was turf walls with an outer skin of turf on its edge to shed the weather.
Who are these?
These are
fantastic chaps.
You have John McKinnon, whose house we can see in the distance, and it's still a fairly substantial ruin.
They're pretty severe-looking characters. It's hard to imagine them having much fun at a ceilidh, I have to say.
Well...
They look more like an execution squad.
They would let their hair down when the time came.
Let their hair down?
Yeah.
Every part of their face is covered in hair.
Yeah.
Daily life on Mingulay was captured on film in the early 20th century.
Work formed a major part of their life. From February, mid-February onwards, the men folk would be engaged in the long line fishing out to the west of here into the south of Barra Head. Then they would have the seabird season with the eggs, and their feathers, of course, would be sent over to Barra and sold in Barra and onwards.
If that's the men, what were the women doing?
Well, the women folk were just as busy. They were looking after the children in the household. They would pluck the seabirds, they would gather the feathers together, they would be spinning, weaving, they would milk the cattle, they would tend the ship, they would do everything that the men folk, if the men folk weren't here to do it.
This age-old lifestyle was bound together by the strong oral tradition of the islanders. History wasn't written down, it was spoken and remembered. Many people memorised their family line by adding the names of their ancestors into their own full name. It's a tradition that survived the test of time. By recalling his full name, Callum can trace his family line back for 500 years.
Callum, Ruadi, Ian Ellisted, ich credi Van, ich Kechanyok, ich Kemish, ich credi Gui, ich Kileon in Vod, ich Knidok, ich Ruadi Darter.
Fantastic.
That would take you back to the late 1500s.
How'd you fit that in your passport?
Oh, if there was room for it.
I think we should bring that back.
Yeah.
Now, memories are all that remain. By the 1880s, the population had reached a peak of 160, but the island resources couldn't cope with the increase. Food was scarce, homes were overcrowded and disease was rife. In 1907, a group of desperate men abandoned Mingulay and took up squatters' rights on the neighbouring island of Battersea. It was the beginning of the end. The last man left Mingulay in 1912. It shows just what a fragile grip we have on these isles. Battersea, the island where many of the Mingulay folk took refuge, only thrives today because of this causeway, a permanent link to the wider world. Since 1991, the population of Battersea has actually increased by just over a third. In real terms, it means an extra 24 people, and that means more mail for the postman.
My name is Miguel Campbell. I am the postman in Battersea.
An integral part of island life is being able to turn your hand to many things. Postman Michael is also a crofter, but he still finds time for his real passion, music and his band.
We are the Battersea Boys.
This is Sea Sunday. There's going to be a mass.
Fisherman's Mass.
And then they're going to bless
And-
boats. And they're going to have a boat race.
Boat race, yes.
The sea's where the people make their living, the sea's where they work, the sea's all around you. See, it's Sunday. But that's what life in the Highlands is all about, watching other people doing things.
They're all like hogs
That's
here.
it,
They don't miss a thing.
No?
You fart down here, someone over there will know about it.
Ah. And somebody over there will smell it and say, you had it last night.
All around the British Isles, the coastline is often at the forefront of dramatic events, and the Outer Hebrides have seen their fair share of that drama.
We're a long way from continental Europe here, but during the Second World War, these islands on the edge of the Atlantic were right in the front line of the struggle against Nazi Germany.
Bases on the Outer Hebrides provided vital protection for the Atlantic convoys, the merchant ships so crucial to our wartime supplies. Vessels from all around the British Isles would gather at Loch Ewe on the edge of the Atlantic. The convoy of ships would then head across the open sea, where the deadly German U-boats prowled. These merchant ships didn't only bring vital supplies back to Britain, they also carried exports to America, cargo that would raise much needed revenue. Miranda Kristovnikov is on the trail of one of these convoy ships, whose story became a legend.
I'm not going to put my ship on the scary do. I tell you, we're nowhere near any island.
The Ealing comedy Whiskey Galore tells the tale of a whiskey-laden merchant ship which runs aground off the fictional Hebridean island of Today.
What was your cargo?
50,000 cases of whiskey.
For the islanders, the unexpected bounty is like manna from heaven. But this isn't just film fiction, it's a true story. One of the convoy ships, the SS Politician, ran aground here off the island of Eriskay in February 1941. Among her assorted cargo was 250,000 bottles of whiskey. Maurice Watson is the SS Politician's last survivor. So we are now right above the site of the shipwreck, and you haven't been back here for 65 years.
65 years,
Yeah.
1941.
How does it feel? That beneath us is actually the wreck of your ship.
It's rather exciting to come back and nostalgic, I suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Maurice's journey started in Liverpool. The SS Politician, full of whiskey for export, set sail for the Hebrides to rendezvous with the Atlantic convoy. A 17-year-old cadet, Maurice was on the bridge with the captain. As they weaved their way north around the mosaic of islands, the weather took a turn for the worse. As if gales weren't bad enough, because there was a war on, all the lighthouses had been painted black and were operating on reduced power. Unfortunately, this didn't only confuse the enemy. On the bridge, Maurice and the others didn't realise that the ship and her cargo of whiskey were on a collision course with Eriskay.
Quite out of the blue, it was the naval gunner that actually saw it first. He said, oh, there's a battleship or something. And we looked, and so we all thought it was a ship, but it turned out to be a rock, little island.
That one over there?
I assume it was that one, yes.
Yeah.
And there was a crash, and we hit rocks.
The captain gave the order to abandon ship. For Maurice and the crew, the story of the Politician was over. But for the rash-and-weary islanders, it was just the beginning. Coastal communities have always considered wrecks bounty from the sea, so it's no surprise that word of this precious cargo spread around the islands like wildfire. Whiskey Galore faithfully portrays groups of men braving the stormy seas to liberate the Scotch. One of those was 97-year-old Ian Smith.
I didn't find whiskey at that time. I found it now, better now. Oh, that terrible place going in that there was full of oil, black with oil. Yes. One night I got 4 cases.
4?
4 cases.
For over a year, the wreck of the Politician lay stranded on the rocks. Government salvage teams stripped the boat by day, and the islanders liberated the whiskey by night. The place was awash with the contraband. But with so much duty-free alcohol circulating the islands, the local customs and excise men stepped in. This is where the merriment and fun of the film diverges dramatically from the grim reality. I've come across a rare recording from 1942 describing just what happened when the revenue men arrived.
Then began an invasion of Eriskay by policemen, excisemen and inspectors. Houses, barns, sheds, dungeons were ruthlessly ransacked. Even the silver sands and the solitary caves of Eriskay were not immune from the prying instrument of the excise officers.
The zealous excisemen confiscated dozens of fishing boats and arrested 35 islanders. 19 were sent to prison. It was a harsh punishment for a poor community in the middle of war. Finally, officials packed the remains of the wrecked ship with gelignite and blew her up. The revenue men thought that would be the end of Whiskey Galore, but the story has endured to this day.
This bottle of whiskey was actually salvaged from the wreck of the SS Politician over 65 years ago. And you can still read the stamp on the bottle that says federal law forbids sale or reuse of this bottle. And that's what all the fuss was about, the unpaid excise duty. Now, unfortunately, you can't drink this. It's full of oil and seawater. But that doesn't stop bottles like this selling at auction for up to £10,000. And every so often, a bottle is still washed up, so watch the seas.
Odd things get washed up on islands. Places like this are great for digging around in the undisturbed past. Hog heaven for someone like me.
As an archaeologist, I've found some strange things in some unexpected places. I once found a chamber pot dropped by Zulus after the Battle of the Sandalwana in South Africa. But here on South Uist, someone has found an entire lost golf course.
Concealed for more than 70 years by a blanket of wild flowers and grassland, the discovery of this course is the golfing equivalent of stumbling across a forgotten Picasso masterpiece. But the artist here was golf legend Old Tom Morris. To find out about Old Tom's forgotten masterpiece, I'm meeting up with greenkeeper Gordon Irvin and local golfer Donald McInnes.
So tell me more about what Tom Morris did. I mean, why is he such a name?
Well, he was the original golf professional at St Andrews. He won the Open Championship on 4 occasions. His most famous work would undoubtedly be the work he did on the old course as we know it at St Andrews,
Right.
the new, Prestwick, Carnoustie, Royal Dornoch. For decades after, people came and studied his work, and that then went into other parts of the world to help design courses there.
There had long been rumours of a lost Tom Morris course here on South Uist, but until now, no one believed it existed. The discovery of a 19th century golf almanac proved that Old Tom created a course here at the behest of Lady Cathcart, the owner of the island. After some careful detective work, Gordon and Donald located the exact site of the original course.
Now, Gordon, my idea of a golf course is something carefully manicured. Where is the golf course?
This is golf in its sheer raw state, and here it's about as much playing against the harsh elements as it is hitting the golf ball. You've got your classic dune system created by the Atlantic swell. So they had no earth-moving machinery back then. So they actually they found and plotted the golf courses through the natural terrain rather than trying to move anything.
Right.
This is the holy grail of golf. This is the one we've been searching for.
It was lost for so long because it fell into disuse and became overgrown after the island was sold in the early 1900s. But all that is about to change as Donald and the local club plan to restore the course to its former glory. And with Gordon's know-how, they've already worked out Old Tom's original layout.
I see you've got a flag in there. If that's the green, are we on the tee for that?
As far as we can tell, this would be the teeing area. It would be somewhere in this location. What you're looking at here is that classic short par 4 links hole.
Donald, you've played it. How does it play?
It's hard to believe that when you see the flag so close to you that you can hit a fantastic shot, good clean contact, and you're still only about 215 yards.
What club do you recommend?
Today, probably a low-flying rocket, just to assist the flight of the ball.
This is raw golf. For adventurous players, this is as exciting as it gets.
What are the chances? You think a wide low stance?
Absolutely. Keep your balance.
You dancer, look at that.
Yeah.
Not too shabby.
That's a cracker.
A disaster, obviously.
You wanted to play off the beach with your second shot?
Oh, I'm great on the beach. This is going to be the best golf course in the world, mark my words. It's my fee. Is the secretary in? I tried the clubhouse, but it seems to be shut.
Our journey up the Outer Hebrides continues along North Uist to Balranald. The coast here is dramatic and unspoilt. These fertile plains are one of the rarest habitats in Europe. This sandy grassland is known as macher. The macher forms on the coast as wind-blown sand settles like a dusting of pepper over the peaty land, and nature blooms. There's an abundance of wild flowers, from humble daisies and buttercups to the more exotic-looking orchids and ragged robin. And the flowers attract insects and birds, making the Balranald Nature Reserve a haven for wildlife. Leaving behind the low-lying plains of North Uist, we're heading north over the water to the mountainous terrain of Harris.
Most of us do the majority of our travelling overland, but long before there were any roads, the fastest and most efficient way of getting around the place was by boat.
I'm John Macaulay, or Shawnee McGanley, as I prefer to be known in my own language. I was born and brought up here on the island of Harris. I'm a boat builder, traditional boat builder, working with wood all the time. Started an apprenticeship when I was 16, building steel ships in Glasgow shipyard. But I always preferred smaller boats. Came back to Harris about 30 years ago, and I've been working here ever since then. There's been a shed on this site as far back as I remember, and I built my first ever boat in here. I was probably, I think, about 20 or 21. Just a small boat, 12-foot rowing boat. So, strong feelings for this place. I think it's important with all craft skills that these are passed on from generation to generation. They are basic survival skills. It doesn't matter what sphere of work you're in, the skills should be passed on.
We're heading north over the Isles of Harris and Lewis. Houses and villages huddle round the coastline. It's where the land is the most fertile. And having the sea on the doorstep means food and transport are within easy reach. The largest town on Lewis is Stornoway, today a commercial hub for the islands. But 150 years ago, they struck gold, black gold, and the Lewis oil industry was born. Alice Roberts is off to find out about this industrial revolution.
In 1844, the Isle of Lewis had a new owner, Sir James Matheson, and he came here with philanthropic ideals. He built schools and roads for the local community. But he was also a bit of an entrepreneur, and he wanted to break into the oil business.
Having made his fortune in the Far East through the opium and tea trade, James Matheson retired to Lewis and built himself a luxurious castle by the sea. Ever the opportunist, his eye was caught by the island's vast natural resource, peat, 350 square miles of it. For generations, families in the Outer Hebrides have cut and dried peat to use as a domestic fuel. But Matheson's bold scheme was to turn this peat into oil. In 1852, this was a remarkable notion. Back then, they relied on lamp oil for lighting, and that had to be extracted from fish and whales. There wasn't an oil industry as we know it today, so Matheson's plan of extracting it from peat was nothing short of a chemical revolution. Mike Bullivant from the Open University knows all about the magical properties of peat.
Here, look, see, there's some peat left out to dry here.
It's just been cut.
Yep. And if you look closely at it, you can see its origins. It's not too different from the sphagnum moss it started out as.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is the peat of tomorrow.
Excellent. I mean, you can still see the structure of it all down here, can't you?
Yeah. It's just like the first stage of coal formation.
So you've got rotting plant matter, still with a lot of energy trapped in it.
Yeah, it's just a solar energy store, this.
Yeah.
And it's not such a crazy idea, actually, to try and extract tar from this by heating the peat.
Yeah.
And then you further refine the tar to get paraffin oil.
Right.
Extracting paraffin oil from peat to use for lighting was ingenious. Matheson planned big. He set about building the Lewis Chemical Works.
Considering we're talking about the 19th century here, there's very little documentary evidence about Lewis Chemical Works. And in fact, pretty much the only surviving document is this. This is a copy of a document that was written by one of Matheson's employees, and it's rather ominously called The Beginning and the End of the Lewis Chemical Works. And it describes the idea, it describes the setting up of the chemical works, the distillation of hydrocarbon oil from peat, and it describes some of the early experiments. They weren't entirely successful. It talks about, here we go, distillation of peat at the side of a fish pond in the vicinity of Lewis Castle. We're in the grounds of Lewis Castle here, where soon the discovery was made that the distillation of peat was deadly to fish in the pond. And they decided after that to move the chemical works outside of the castle grounds, but after that they managed to kill all the fish off in the nearby river as well, before they were successful.
After the fish poisoning incident, it was obvious that Matheson needed a real scientist to perfect the process. So he brought in the chemist, Dr. Benjamin Horatio Paul, to take charge of the peat distillation. Mike's going to try to reproduce Dr. Paul's revolutionary work.
Dr. Paul didn't have to dig his own hole.
Armed with a handful of bricks, a metal drum and a bag of dried peat, Mike is hoping to extract oily tar from the peat. He's relying on the same science as Dr. Paul did, albeit on a slightly smaller scale.
So I charged the drum about 2/3 full of peat. I put it over the hot coals. I've only just placed it on there, but already we're getting, you see this? This is steam coming off first of all, because there's a bit of moisture in the peat still. And what will happen in a few minutes' time, I expect there to be water collecting in the jam jar, containing ammonia salts and things like that. And eventually, when the heat inside the drum is high enough, we'll get tar coming over. And the tar is the source of the paraffin oil for the lamps. So it's just a matter of waiting.
While Mike's drum of peat cooks away, I'm curious to know what the real oil refinery looked like. All that's visible today is the straight line of the rail track which transported the peat, and a few grass-covered lumpy ruins. Dr. Ali Whiteford has spent years pulling together the surviving documentary evidence. He's discovered how this unpromising peatland was transformed into a full-blown chemical works.
The site would have been this area just down here.
Yeah.
And the track extended across the condensers and then across the kilns, and then the peat was emptied directly down into the kilns from the track on the top, as we can see in this wee diagram here.
Yeah.
And the kilns here, there were 10 of them, 2 rows of 5, and they just took the tops off and emptied the peat into the kilns, and the process was continuous.
Fantastic. I mean, this is on a large scale. It's very much like the experiment that Mike is doing on the beach.
That's right, yes.
Oh, look at this. This is really going. That's nasty black tar coming off here. Look at that. Yeah.
As well as getting the first droplets of tar, Mike's noticed that the gas coming off the peat is flammable. Dr. Paul discovered this the hard way after a near disaster.
One night the night watchman was doing his rounds with a candle, and he chanced up by the chimney and found that the gas from the chimney actually caught fire, and it was a huge flame that came out the chimney. It quite
so
scared
his
everyone.
lamp lit it?
Yes, yes, and they had to shut the whole works down, and this caused quite a fright. But the outcome was that the horrible smell of the gas being wafted by the prevailing winds over to Stornoway was stopped because they found they could burn it and use it as a fuel.
The excess gas was put to work as a fuel for burning the peat. Nothing went to waste. The ingenuity of Dr. Paul and his team eventually got their unique chemical works running very efficiently. The peat was turned into a dazzling range of products: paraffin lamp oil, candles, and the excess tar was sold as lubricant and sheep dip.
Ali, look at this.
I think we've got a result here.
Mike, what have you cooked up?
We have tar, look at that.
Fantastic.
Oh, amazing.
Tar from peat.
So in there's a whole different mixture of chemicals.
How would you get from that to things like lamp oil then?
A process called fractional distillation. So it's very careful distillation which separates out the different solvents in there according to their boiling temperatures. But we could get paraffin oil if we had enough time.
The Lewis Chemical Works was the first company in the world to make a commercial success of converting peat into oil. But it wasn't to last. In 1862, the chief chemist, Dr. Paul, unexpectedly left. There's no record of why. His unscrupulous successor would destroy the business that Dr. Paul had built up. The new man started to cook the books.
This guy actually sabotaged the work.
Really?
What he was doing, he was redirecting all the tar and converting it. He managed to figure out how to convert it into the lamp oil, and he was selling it locally and lined his own pockets.
So he was embezzling?
He was embezzling.
Rather than fight the fraud, Sir James Matheson decided to cut his losses and shut up shop. 22 years after it opened, the Lewis Chemical Works closed its kilns forever. Matheson continued scheming to improve his new island home by building roads and harbours, but he never realised his dreams of becoming an oil baron.
On my travels, I've met loads of people who are captivated by the coast, but few have the courage to get this close, just 2 feet above the water. Paddy Winterton has recently completed a 750-mile kayak trip, unaided and all alone, from Glasgow to the Outer Hebrides, with a brief stop off at St Kilda and on to the tip of Shetland, Muckleflugga, the UK's most northerly point. Paddy captured this remarkable voyage of endurance with his own camera.
I've just been around the Butt of Lewis, and all I can say is I'm shaking. That was quite staggering. Even the big crossings don't compare. We're going around headlands like this. There's current coming both ways, big swell coming in off the Atlantic. But it's good, that's what it's all about.
I caught up with him in the more tranquil waters of Stornoway Harbour. When you're approaching an island in one of these, it strikes me that you're seeing it in exactly the same way that the first arrivals on the islands 10,000 years ago would have seen them.
Well, there were certainly times when I thought I could appreciate what the Vikings were, the problems they had. And especially in something this small, you've only got a vantage height of, 2.5 feet. So it's very difficult to pick your landing spot. But it's also quite exciting because you're trying to assess, is there anywhere to stay? Is there any food? Is there any water? Exactly the same sort of things as they went through. I'd been going for 8 hours, 52 minutes before I saw land. And I was only 250 metres away from it. And in fact, I heard it a long, long time before I saw it. So, quite dramatic.
What goes through your mind when you're out there alone in the middle of the trackless ocean?
to be honest, if there's a lot going on, if there's a lot of wind and waves, you're busy thinking about that. Hopefully there's lots of wildlife which keeps you going. You have to be very disciplined, you have to feed, you have to drink, so there's quite a lot of thinking that needs to be done to get there. And the pleasure isn't in the crossing. The pleasure is in arriving in these fantastic places that very, very few people have been to. You can land on beaches that haven't been trodden for years and years and make them your own. You sort of feel a bit like a laird for a night.
What is the biggest problem or the biggest danger that you run across?
Well, you got whales, you got container ships, you got waves, but the biggest thing of all is probably the wind and an unexpected change in the strength of the wind. Once you're up to force 8, you have no option of going but to go with it. And if it's going to America, you're going to America until it dies down. But any day of the week, I'd rather be in one of these than in a small fishing boat, which you also meet out there 40 miles out to sea.
So you feel safer in that than you would in s02e07?
Any day of the week, certainly, yeah.
There are over 120 islands to explore along the Outer Hebrides. Only 13 of these are inhabited, but the others are far from deserted. The Shants are 3 small volcanic islands huddled together around 4 miles off the east coast of Lewis. Although no one lives there, the place is bustling with wildlife. Our resident zoologist Miranda Kristovnikov is heading off to meet some of the island's more colourful inhabitants.
The Shant Islands are home to one of the biggest puffin colonies around our coast. Every April, thousands of these little squat birds appear from the North Atlantic Ocean on an epic journey back to these islands where they were born.
The puffins have come here to breed, and with a bit of luck, most of the eggs will have hatched by now, and the proud parents should be scurrying in and out of their burrows with food for the chicks. That makes it the best time of year for me to get close to these charismatic birds and find out just how well they survive on these windswept islands.
Dumpy, with day-glow bills, tangerine feet and tails that look as if they've had an encounter with a carving knife, puffins are surprisingly agile birds both in the air and in the sea. Useful skills when you spend over 7 months of the year covering thousands of miles of the vast Atlantic. The Shant Islands are a far cry from the puffin's solitary ocean life. Here, they've got to get along with the neighbours, 150,000 of them.
Living so tightly packed together on the island, puffins have developed quite advanced ways of communicating by calling to each other, using their bills and different body postures. Just been looking at a group down there. There's one standing up very straight, very upright. Basically that's saying, this is my territory and I own this burrow.
But their posturing is not all about property. Puffins mate for life, and they have their own special way of showing affection. In this bleak environment, there's little in the way of building materials for nests, so the puffins have to be resourceful to keep their little ones safe. If they can't build up, they dig down.
Hi Martin, how you doing?
Martin Scott, Conservation Officer with the RSPB, knows this colony well.
This slope is just absolutely littered with burrows, isn't it?
And here we go, here's one just here.
Promising, isn't it? Do they come back to the same burrow every year?
They do, they come back and they clean it out and then sort of reline it with this nice sort of bed of dry grass. Puffins are really the perfect digging machine, and they dig out very easily in the sort of soft peaty soil here, so that's why this sort of embankment's all just covered in burrows.
There's also a large number nesting on the rocks. Is there any advantage to that environment?
Well, the rocks will be a lot more exposed, but they'll drain off a lot easier, whereas in this peaty soil they've got potential to get waterlogged, although the peat can act as an insulator to the nests.
Doesn't seem to be a lot of action on that one. Should we go, maybe head into the centre of the colony there, see if we can find an
Head up
active
the hill.
Unusually for this time of year, some puffins are still cooped up in their burrows. With the help of a pencil camera, it's a perfect opportunity to peek into their hobbit-like homes.
Now, I'm a little worried that this is going to cause a bit of disturbance, the puffins. Are they going to mind?
I think we should be okay as long as we don't spend too long.
They're quite hygienic little animals, aren't they?
They are, which might be a little bit of a problem for us here. They have their toilet right at the front here.
A separate toilet area stops the droppings stripping the waterproof coating off the chick's feathers. Handy when you spend so long at sea.
You've got your hand in the poo there. I'm very happy you're doing that, well done.
To the left there.
Yeah, if you just work it round that corner a little bit. There's a few feathers.
Who's that at the
There's
back?
an adult at the back, yeah, you can see it's...
Just his head?
Yep, and his beak coming in shot as well. I don't see a chick. Do you think it might still be...
I think it's still sitting on eggs.
Yeah.
That's mum or dad.
It seems a bit late in the year for that though. Surely they would have hatched by now.
It is, you would have thought so, but everything does seem very late this year. It seems to be a very late spring overall.
It's nice and dry and warm and cosy in there too.
Should we just leave it be?
Yeah, nice one. Well done.
Let's get the camera out now.
Okay.
There we go.
Home life on the Shant Islands is made even more agreeable by the rich pickings in the sea. The plankton-rich water is ideal if you're a great swimmer and love to eat small fish. This is the perfect place to get up close to these versatile birds and observe how well they perform underwater. Watching them chase fish, their quirky body shape suddenly makes sense. Their wings act as fins and their webbed feet become a rudder, making them fly through the water with incredible grace.
These puffins can dive to a depth of over 60 metres. That's as much as a 15-storey building. Although here in the Minch, they nearly dive to around 20 metres to find the sand eels that they feed on.
To snap their prey, they can reach speeds of 5.5 miles an hour. That's faster than a record-holding Olympic swimmer. Seeing these birds underwater, it's hard to believe they're also creatures of the sky, as slick as seals, but as flight-loving as seagulls. The puffins are totally at home here, both above and below the waterline.
With only a few more stops to go on our island hopping tour, we're now heading west. 40 miles out into the Atlantic Ocean lies a group of islands which have an almost mythical status. St Kilda. It's a place of superlatives. The biggest sea cliffs in Britain, the largest seabird colonies, and the remotest village street. Regular lines of stone walls and houses are still standing, but the last native St Kildans left in 1930. Increasing contact with the industrialised world had destroyed their traditional way of life. Today the houses are empty, except in the summer months when they are home to a band of conservationists dedicated to preserving the past.
I love the island, I love the isolation, I love its location, the pure beauty of the place. I'm Samantha Dennis. I'm here as the archaeologist for the National Trust of Scotland, and my job here really is to look after all the cultural material on St Kilda. So I go around checking on the buildings, also rebuild some of the walls when they've fallen down, basically just keep the standing structures, the buildings, in the way that they were when the island was evacuated in 1930. This is actually the house of old Callum MacDonald, known as Old Blind Callum. We know exactly who is living in these cottages. To us, it's more than just a structure. It's got the whole sort of history of the island embedded within the house itself. People are just attracted to the island. To come to St Kilda is an amazing opportunity, but also people want to be able to contribute to the conservation of the place, to be able to come back here in a few years' time and say, you know, I built that wall.
My name's Jean Brown. I live in Ayr, and I'm here on St Kilda on a work party. Strange to actually be here, to walk up the street that you've seen loads of photographs of. Fascinating.
1, 2.
You really feel as if you're contributing something, sense of achievement.
Good morning. How are you? Not too bad. How are you? Fine. One of the best things about being on St Kilda is the number of people you meet, the variety of people, and the skills that you learn from people passing through. Everything from handling puffins to reslating roofs to fixing a block drain, and you kind of feel the feeling of you belong somewhere, you've done something for someone else.
It's difficult to say, you know, what's been the best moment, because it's just such an experience being here.
The islands of the Outer Hebrides are bursting with archaeology and ancient monuments. But the most enigmatic of them all are the magnificent standing stones at Callanish on Lewis, put up around 3000 BC by Neolithic farmers. It doesn't take much to realise that this stone circle and avenue was a site of great importance. But why they were erected has puzzled visitors and archaeologists for centuries. You can speculate to your heart's content about what these stones were for, but the thing that gets me is just how old they are. It's 5,000 years old. That means before there was anything, before there were cities, before there were roads, before there were big populations, before there were pyramids in Egypt, there was this. Many stone circles are probably associated with the sun and the stars, but the layout of Callanish is more likely linked to the movements of the moon. That's the theory, although we will never know what was in the mind of the communities that gathered here for generations. Fast forward 5 millennia, and the islanders are still gathering together for gala days, like this one at Uig, North Lewis. I'm not sure there's any deep significance to the bouncy castle, though. Travelling further along the northwest of Lewis, we're meeting up with a new face on coast. Hermione Coburn, an earth scientist who's exploring a clean green energy project that may soon connect us all to this far-off island.
There's an asset the Outer Hebrides has in abundance. You can't see it, but you can feel it. The wind.
The strong southwesterly winds that blow right across the UK and Northern Europe are generated miles out in the middle of the Atlantic. The first place these winds hit land is here on the Outer Hebrides, so they feel the full undiminished force. The locals exploit this resource and harness the energy that blows over the flat, exposed moorland, but they only capture a tiny fraction of the power overhead. The average wind speed here is 50% higher than the national average, so it's no surprise these islands are an attractive location for commercial wind farm developers. Engineer and wind turbine expert Richard Tarves knows exactly how to get the best out of what nature provides for free.
Okay, you ready? 1, 2, 3.
Woo! It's flying! Woo! Oh, it looks brilliant! It looks so powerful!
Yeah, you can really feel the power increase as it lifts up.
Richard, it really looks like as the kite goes higher, sort of pulling more on the strings.
Yeah, and that's what we're looking for. It's the same principle with a kite as a wind turbine. We want to get up as high as possible to the cleaner, faster air. If the wind speed increases a little bit, the power increase is quite dramatic.
So why do you need high wind speeds then for your wind turbine? I mean, once it's going, isn't that enough?
Well, not really. You want to get the best out of your wind turbine, and the power output is very sensitive to wind speed. If you can double the wind speed, that means you get 8 times the power output from your turbine. So it makes an enormous difference.
Absolutely.
There are big plans to harness the high-altitude pulling power of the wind here on Lewis. There's a proposal to put up 180 wind turbines to the tip of its blade, each one 140 metres tall, reaching up into the sky where the wind blows strongest. The developers believe this site will generate enough electricity for 1 million people, making it the world's biggest onshore wind farm. They estimate it could bring in over £7 million to landowners and the local economy. If it goes ahead, local construction firms would hope to win the contract to build the towers. Just now, this company is making similar ones for smaller onshore and offshore wind turbines.
The scale of these towers is just staggering. And you don't really appreciate it until you get up close. This one's 60 metres, but in the proposed wind farm, they're going to be even higher, at 90 metres.
Steel skyscrapers that will transform the wild moorland landscape of Lewis. Whether it's wind, wave or nuclear, our coastline often pays the price for our thirst for energy. It's a question of how much we're willing to sacrifice, and the debate is raging around our shores. It's the scale and size of the Lewis wind farm which horrifies teacher Katrina Campbell, who chairs the group Moors Without Turbines.
Katrina, tell me what this moorland landscape means to you.
This moorland means everything to me, really. I was born and brought up here, and when people ask you in Gaelic where you come from, what they ask you actually is, where do you belong to? And
How would you say that in Gaelic?
I belong to this place, Búnimid de Bhrágad. I belong to this place, and Bhrágad isn't just the group of houses that you see. Bhrágad extends all the way out to these hills there, and I think belonging to a place brings responsibilities, and we who belong to Lewis have responsibilities to Lewis.
Standing here, what would we see if the proposal was to go ahead?
Well, the wind farm will be everywhere you can see, all the way around. It's not something that you'll drive past. If you live here, you will live with this wind farm 24 hours a day. We would be quite happy in Lewis to produce renewable energy sufficient for our own needs. I'm sure that nobody here would object to that. But what's being asked of us is something completely different.
The site will extend over 30 miles of moorland. In addition to the 180 turbines, there'll be 107 miles of roads, 141 pylons and 9 substations. To get a sense of the immense scale of this construction, the proposed wind farm would stretch right across Greater London. The developers argue that it must be so big to justify the expense of an underwater cable needed to distribute the electricity around the UK. The power cable could also open the door for other renewable schemes and turn the Isle of Lewis into a hub of green energy production. Kevin Murray is a local engineer who works for the wind farm developers.
We are sitting on top of wave, tidal, wind resource that anyone would give their right hand for. But we've got it here, and I just think we've got to take advantage of that. We're talking about the coastline here. We live on an island surrounded by sea. If there's one place that should be concerned about rising sea levels and global warming, it's an island in the North Atlantic. So like it or not, we are in the situation we are. We have the resource. It's a question now, do we tap into it? If we don't, then I think we're losing a great opportunity.
It's easy to think of this place as on the edge and out of the way, but it's a unique environment, a globally important bogland, with wildlife and birds protected by European law. But the Scottish Executive can give the go-ahead to the proposal if there's judged to be an overriding public interest. It's only by being here that you get a real sense of the impact the wind farm will have on the island and the community. Like so many energy schemes around our coast, it's a matter of where our priorities lie.
There's nothing like a lighthouse to tell you that you've reached the edge of something. And here at the butt of Lewis, it really is the edge, because after this, it's pretty much open sea all the way to the Arctic.
Life in the Outer Hebrides has always been a challenge, maybe even a struggle at times. But that life is deeply rooted and the culture is rich. For people living here, this isn't the edge, this is just where they are. To them, this is the centre. There's only one way to go from here, and that's south, way down south, to England's capital coast. From here, it'd be quicker to go to Norway.
Next time,
I don't believe it.
Nick journeys back in time to the violent origin of the River Thames. We discover where London's coast actually stops. The Navy are searching for the dangerous legacy of the Second World War. And Alice unravels the secrets of making rope.